everybody. This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And today I have my favorite author back to join us again. It seems like we've been doing this annually for the last few years, and I love it. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Claremont.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
I will, however, have you note that I've got Betsy watching my back. So
okay. Dialogue. I see her back there. Yeah. So you have a project coming up next year, early next year, right? If I'm not mistaken.
In February, yes.
Yeah, so it's a return back to a classic issue. I think it's among a lot of people's favorite issue of X-Men. It's Uncanny 268. So it's the Wolverine Madripoor Nights. What exactly is this project?
What happens 4 hours later.
Okay. And how long is it going to go? And who's your collaborator?
5 issues. And it just, in basic terms, which I assume many people have an idea, having seen the covers for the first issue at least, and possibly the second, it's brings the original team back together again, except Captain America and the Scarlet and
Black Widow.
The Widow. Thank you. My brain has gone south for the weekend.
It's okay.
For the week. It's Christmas. Basically, it's all three of them teaming up as one. In the X-Men issue, Cap and Wolverine teamed up in the past. The Widow and Logan teamed up in the present. Now they're all together.
Okay. Now, was this idea something that's been running through your head for a long time, and you just never had a chance to execute it?
I don't. It's these days. It's mostly a matter of Mark calling up the editor, calling up and saying, "Hey, what about this?" And me going, "Oh, okay." I mean, I've pitched ideas, but it's basically a matter of seeing what is most compatible with the current run and direction of the canon. And right now, everything's in a significant transition, moving off of the Krakoa years and into whatever is coming up. This year, with a whole new oversight team.
Yeah, so we're getting out of the Krakoa era and going into whatever era they decide to call it. And I mean, that's always been a thing with X-Men, right? It's the ever continuing change in X-Men, no matter what. At the end of the day, I think most of us X fans want the X-Men back at the mansion. No matter how much we love change, it just I think creatures of habit, right?
It depends on how the story begins and where it goes. I mean, that's basically it. How they get there, how that all fits into global continuity. It's always been a Marvel hallmark, as opposed to the DC policy of everything linked together in one ongoing story arc. And we'll just have to wait and see.
And I do have to ask, like, when the Krakoa era was going on, you had written some stuff that had taken place in the past, like the Extreme X-Men issue, which was quite excellent, that series. Then you did the Gambit in Storm. And to you, does it always feel like going back home, like these characters, like you never stop writing them whenever you go back to that era?
Yeah.
So it's always it's like riding a bike, huh? You never forget.
Well, I think it's a matter of the one essential reality of the first 16 plus years plus I guess the Extreme X-Men arc
Mhm.
it's I don't have to worry about anyone else's continuity. I defined everything, and it gets much more complicated moving ahead from that. So those are setting things among those stories, and goodness knows there's more than enough stories not told from that era that I could keep going forever, just filling in the gaps. But this way, it doesn't step on anyone else's continuity. It doesn't create any sort of conflicts or concerns with subsequent stories.
Mhm.
Um, it's just the way it is. I for me, I remember when I was looking at Crisis on Infinite Earths to move way out of Marvel continuity, and the there was a significant moment in that arc that I looked at and thought, no, 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 you've missed a bet. And I immediately sketched out what it should have been and how it should have been, and what I would have thought would be a far more interesting way of spinning out of Crisis and into regular continuity. And all I really succeeded in doing was piss Marv Wolfman off significantly, because what I was essentially saying was, you got it wrong, I got it right. And nobody likes that. I don't like it. Marv certainly didn't like it. I don't think anyone in current Marvel writing structure would like it.
Mhm.
But I tend to be very egocentric, and think my ideas are better than everyone else's. So I have an inspiration, I'll play with it, and sometimes when I'll sketch it out at conventions, the audience of that panel will like it, but it's not. This is just my opinion of the way things would work, and my reaction is very much, if it were done to me, which it has been, I would be as irked as I'm sure the original writers were when I do it. But sometimes I can't help myself. If I see a story and I see a logical way for it to go, I follow that lead.
When you mentioned Crisis on Infinite Earths, and do you do you think that that's something, I know that's a DC thing, right? Like every few years they've been doing a crisis and then rebooting the
Mhm.
universe. Do you think Marvel is the type of universe that would benefit from that? Starting over from scratch? I mean, and I'm not talking about just the Ultimate Universe. I'm talking about the 616. Um, do you think
That's
writers and stories would benefit from that, or do you like the continuity in
Well,
history?
but at some point you get to the point where what are you going at what point in that perception, do you invalidate Stan's and Jack's contribution to the line?
Mm,
If you're going to reboot everything, then you're saying Stan and Jack and et al. Don't exist, or didn't exist, or are less relevant. In the same way that one might end up saying, well, if we're going to say that those books are of less, that contribution is of less value, then my contribution is of less value, and on from there. Yeah, you can do it, but and you will possibly find a significant amount of readers who might bond with it and enjoy it.
mhm.
But it cuts both ways. Sometimes some things might work, some things might not. If For me as a reader, and I go back a ridiculous amount of time, and that might not be of relevance now, but am I really interested in a Spider-Man that has no relationship to the Spider-Man that I read back in the day?
Mhm.
You know, and where does that link in with the film universe or the TV universe? I mean,
So
who knows? In 20 years or 30 years, it might. It might evolve in different directions. But right here, right now, you play the team you've got.
but I'm also a big fan of continuity and respect for things that happened in the past because I think, it definitely involves the character, and I think it definitely puts a writer on the spot and make them think, "Okay, what has not been done with this character?"
Well, I go back again to Stan's original philosophy, which is you stay on the book for a certain amount of time, but when you're done, you put it back on the shelf basically the way you found it,
Mhm,
so that the next person to take over the book has a decent sense of what's what, and the next readers who pick up the book have a similar foundation to stand
mhm.
on. The problem, I mean, that's a valid argument, discussion when writers and or artists are only on the book for 2, 3, maybe 4 years.
That seems to be
My
the case these
problem
days.
my problem was like Stan, I was on the book for a lot longer. Therefore, the
Yeah.
foundation I laid was a lot more extensive. But, some writers, some editors prefer, well, time has passed. The characters should age. Um, the story should reflect that aging. Okay, but if you have a significant number of readers who are aware of the original characters, I mean, how do you deal with Spider-Man and Mary Jane if they're still involved, if they're still married? Do they have all kids? And then how do you deal with the kids growing up? How do you deal with the Peter Parker who, like in the animated films, has a kid, and
Mhm.
he's got to carry the kid around with him, and the kid is a lot more alert and aware of Spider-Man than Mary Jane is, perhaps. So, how do you deal with that in the Spideyverse?
Mhm.
It it gets complicated if for no other reason than certain things cannot be undone. Once the X-Men become public, you can't unpublic them. Once Spidey and MJ get married, you can't divorce them. Once Scott comes to the realization that he loves Madeline and Madeline loves him, and they get married and they have a child, saying that relationship is invalidated is a problem, because from my perspective, no matter how I look at it, what I see is a character that I wrote for 15, 16 years as one person is now dumping his wife and child for his old girlfriend. And more importantly, his old girlfriend and his old teammates are letting him get away with it. That's a challenge. And it took Louise Simonson and I a couple or 3 years to figure out how to resolve it. But
So, yeah, in the case of Scott and Maddie, when he got married,
mhm,
when they had a child, what I know you've spoken to me, and you've spoken to several people about your stance on X Factor,
mhm.
how, it should not have been Jean Grey,
No, no.
and
I can see lots of different ways to do it, which would have created the opportunity for what I thought was a more interesting and and relevant Jean Grey, and one that created the opportunity for the book to go in either X Factor or X-Men, to go in different unexpected directions, which could have been a lot more fun. But that was also the foundation for why I made decisions I made as a writer regarding Magneto, which Marvel overruled.
You're talking about Magneto back in that era when he took over the school and Professor X
The
went to
evolution of that would have been to make him. I saw him as head of the school, a much more interesting character than Charlie. So I figured give Charlie a happy ending, much like Scott, and put Magneto in his place, because Magneto had far more character conflicts in him that made him a much more dramatically interesting character. Charlie was essentially perfect to begin with, so all you could do was, to my eyes, was diminish him. And that seemed like a waste of effort. But that's the essential difference between characters that are owned by the company versus characters that are controlled by an individual. Their perception was to take the characters and take them in vastly different directions, as with the last 4 years.
So would you say, looking back at all those years writing X-Men and of course New Mutants, and you started with Wolverine, but would you say that the editors at the time were challenging you to write stories in a different way, or was it a lot of the case of, no, you can't do that, Chris, there's no way that we're going to do that, like that's not the way that character should go? Like how much because I've talked to both Louise Simonson and you, and I had a chance to talk to Anders Enti about the how different Editorial was at that time and how they kept these characters together. So I was wondering, how many times were you told, we can't go in that direction, and then you had to write a story because the editors were moving in a different direction?
Depends on the editor, depends on the editorial direction of the company. The nice thing about the X-Men was it had a significant number of opportunities to just play. Sorry, my glasses are green.
Go ahead and take your time, sir.
It's not a. It's also a matter of the zeitgeist of the industry around the characters and around publishing. The world when Louise was editing the X-Men was vastly different. The publishing world was vastly different than when Bob Harris was editing it. You just basically deal with it as best you can.
And you did, because I mean, it showed in your scripts. You stayed on the book for 17. Oh my gosh! And then you kept going back, and I love it. It's, to me, having you back always feels like going back home. Like it's something familiar. It's something that it's like, because these characters meant a lot to me, and not just to me. A lot of viewers, especially right now, grew up with your characters and made them the people they are because of the lessons that they learned through your books.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for helping adult most of us that grew up with your comics.
No, but I mean, the reality is every writer has his or her own view of the characters and how they want to portray them, and what stories they wish to tell. It's sometimes editors feel more relevant or feel like embracing a different storyline. I mean, in the last, hell, I remember when I was working with an editor in around the turn of the century.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't even born until 3 or 4 years after I got fired the first time.
Oh
So you're
boy.
talking 1991. So
Uh-huh.
his perception of the characters and of the different than mine. That's the reality. That's what one has to deal with. Are you there? The screen is frozen. Ah, there you are.
Yeah, I'm here, sir. I'm here. Yeah. So you've had to work with editors like from all types of life and ages, right? And people like you just said that weren't even born around the time you got fired.
Which is a weird thing in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. How does it's got to feel a little? It's got to feel a little weird, right? To have these people that maybe grew up with your stories or maybe had to read some of your backlog to kind of keep you up to date with what's current with X-Men. Like, oh, let me tell Chris Claremont what's going on in X-Men.
Let's see if I'm operating within my original run, it's less necessary, which is both good and frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the reality of the industry. That's, complaining about it is just, well, why are we driving on the right side of the street? We should be driving on the left side of the street because that's how they drive in London.
Okay.
It is that it is. Complaining about it doesn't make anything different. It just makes the complainer makes him look like a dingleberry.
That's a term I haven't heard in a while. This is
vintage.
As someone who wasn't born in the time to grow up with Mr. Claremont's run on X-Men and New Mutants, reading it for the first time now has been so much fun and delight. So I hear that a lot, especially with these collected editions when they come out. There's so many new readers reading your stories for the first time and captivated by all these wonderful character developments and evolutions of characters and then your creations. I think it's really cool. And I'm sure you hear that a lot when you go to conventions, right? You see a lot of young people coming dressed up as the characters that you created. A lot. I know, I've seen it. I've had to
I have to say, in all honesty, that the fact, oh, for God's sake, it's getting on to being close to a long time that I've been associated with these characters.
Yes, sir.
And the fact that I'm working on my third generation of readers, the fact that people are still interested, excited, want to see what happens next, perfectly willing to complain about, why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? Why was this not as good as that? That's very cool. There's no reason to complain about that. I guess the frustration is, damn, I want to go back and fix it. I want to go back and tweak the arc or tweak the character so that these readers who are concerned perhaps are more satisfied or find a way to satisfy them. I think that was.
So you would do that? You would go back? Like a special edition?
No,
I know you've gone back to several
special
stories.
editions are. No, I mean, I'd see this deep down inside is the part of me that says I should have found a way not to leave the first time, or Marvel should have found a way to not lose me the first time, so that when Image got created, I'd be sitting there going, well, screw that, I want to kick their ass. That'll teach them.
Oh my gosh, where we could have been, where we would have been, especially
Well,
because
who knows? It could have,
you always wrote for the long game. Like
it could have been
anybody
like
that
that.
ever read your stuff, you set the seeds to the foundation later on, like years ahead of time. And a lot of writers do that nowadays. But I remember you being the first writer. I remember, like, oh my gosh, this is from 10, 12 issues ago.
Yeah,
It's now coming back.
of course. But that's
So
like life.
you had this plan. You had so many plans. And I know later on you got X-Men Forever, but it would have
Well,
been different.
except even then, the minute I got the book, this is supposed to be what I would have done had I stayed on the book. Except I had what I considered more interesting ideas. Killing off Logan. Actually, it wasn't my idea. The assistant editor said, "Well, why don't you just kill him off?" And I said, "What?" And I said, "Well, it's like not like you have to worry about overall continuity." Oh, damn! If only. So I killed him off, but then I cheated and started evolving Kitty in the same
Oh,
direction,
yeah.
which really pissed her off. It's, and part of me is going, if only we had lasted another year or two, because I could have then played with the things I wanted to play with Nightcrawler, and more interestingly, I thought with Kitty and Wakanda. But that's that's the writer speaking as a fanboy. I think you always want to play with the toys,
I don't think
and
you would be called a fanboy though, because you were the
fan
foundation for a lot of those stories.
being the foundation doesn't mean the stories will work all the time. I mean, that's there's some ideas are gold. Some ideas, don't see the iceberg in front of them.
Okay, that is true, but when I hear the term fanboy, I think of people when they're like, "Oh, this feels like a fanfic. This doesn't feel like a comic. This doesn't feel like my Wolverine." And I wouldn't say that about yours because
Well, thank you.
you were the reason why there's so many careers that happen because of you. So many people that read your work, and those people are now writing these stories with these
Hmm.
characters in the same tone that you did.
Hmm.
And it's just amazing because without you, there would be no Wolverine. It wouldn't be the same character, and it's safe to say that. And
Well,
I know you've heard that a lot. Um,
but
but
it's even then, it's when John Bolton and I were doing the backup stories
yeah,
for the first, I don't know, 40 issues of the reprint.
the classics.
Yeah, it was a chance to do 10-page vignettes that went into characters on a level we couldn't do in the regular book. I got to play more for 2 issues anyway with Thunderbird, and part of me is left wishing if only I'd had a week to think about, do we really want to kill him?
Who would you have killed if not Thunderbird?
Who's I don't know.
Could have
Maybe
been
Wolverine.
Wolverine.
No, I mean, but
Could have been.
I mean, Len's rationale for doing it then was the book was a quarterly,
Mhm.
and usually you introduce a character, spend 10, 20 issues building him up, and then slap him down, or her down. In this instance, since it was a quarterly, to do that would have taken 5 years, if not longer.
Oh,
So
right.
far more interesting. Let's do it right off the bat.
Mhm.
And again, since I'd literally just taken over the book and the first half of the story was already drawn, and Dave had to draw like crazy to get the second half done, issue 45, we had to go with it. That's one side of the equation. The second side is Len's original conception of Logan, aside from the fact that he was much younger, a
Yeah.
teenager. The claws are in the glove.
Mhm.
That's why you have the big housings on the back. And then one day, I think, well, when we were structuring out 98, 99 actually. Dave Cockrum walks in, and drawn on the back of a page is a fist with the claws coming out of the fist. And, you know, him saying, I had this idea, and I'm looking at it and I go, oh, that is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Because making them a part of him.
Oh, yeah.
Redefines his character in a fundamentally different way. And actually more cool and much more tragic, as anyone who's seen the first X movie with Hugh Jackman knows. Just from the moment where Rogue looks, you know, says, does it hurt? When he's driving her away. And Hugh looks at her and looks out the window and then looks down at his hand and looks out the window again. I think he might look at her and just says, every time. And as soon as I saw that moment, we're watching the premiere, and I leap up and I say, yes! At which point my wife elbows me on the side and says, sit down and shut up. Because that moment essentially defines him as who and what he is. And sadly, far too few writers take advantage of that to just give the reader that split vision of who and what he is. Every use of the claws, every introduction of them, he's slicing his hand open, and there ideally should be blood. So the reader knows fundamentally what the consequence is. And this is why in X-Men Forever, when the first time Kitty pops the claw, what registers to her is the pain. She's knifing herself. It's not the sort of thing you should do every time, but each of the characters has a yang to their yin. Yes, they have these magnificent powers, or what look like magnificent powers, but there's a price. And ideally, the reader should have the opportunity to identify and, weird as it sounds, appreciate that price. So the character hopefully becomes more empathetic, maybe relevant. Each of the FF have a yang to their yin. They have these magnificent powers, but there's a cost. Spidey has a cost to being Spidey. Bruce has a cost to being Batman. Clark perhaps to being Superman. It should never be, whoopee, I can do all this neat stuff. Maybe not. The only one, I guess, in the canon who should actually actively and ongoingly enjoy it is Gambit.
Oh, yeah.
But only if he's got Ro as a sidekick.
Oh, yeah. And I love talking to you about Gambit and the ideas behind that too. Brought back a lot of memories, a lot of theories us fans had before, you know, the internet was a thing, before we could share it on forums and Twitter and social media. You know, just at the comic book store, who's Gambit? Is he the third summer?
But see, my vision of Gambit is 180 degrees fundamentally different from the Gambit that everybody's reading now. But that's life.
Now, you've worked with George in the past. I remember you guys did an annual number 3, I think.
The annual, yes.
Yeah. But he did some covers. He did one of my favorite covers, which is the Magneto cover with Wolverine's claws coming at him. You mentioned something that I wanted to talk about.
Like, I could never figure that one out. Or the moment within the story in
Oh, okay.
retrospect, because the adamantium claws won't punch through the adamantium laced skeleton. And yeah, they might mess up his brain, but he'll heal. But, you know,
So you
there you
mentioned
go.
in the past when we've done these interviews, seeing some of your stories that you had, because you've
Mhm.
had so many stories, and you had some that you never got to tell, played out and written by other people, like actually coming to fruition, because we are living in different times now. And I remember last year it was, what was it? I think somebody had brought it up in the chat about magic. Was it magic and Kitty Pride?
Mhm.
And ideas that you've had that you wanted to do. I guess my question is, what was the idea that you wanted to do that the editors were like, no, we're not going to do that, and it was the one that you were determined, like, but it worked so well, why can't we do it? Like, it just made you upset.
Well, Magneto.
Mm.
But that's the reality of work for hire. It's not, these aren't your one's toys to play with. As Stan said, you've got to put them back on the shelf the way you found them.
So what does it feel like to see another writer or another creative team get to write those stories these days
Well,
that you wanted to tell?
my hope is that they're the kind of story that if I had $5, I would go buy. I think I disagreed fundamentally with New X-Men on a lot of different levels. Back,
The Grant Morrison's New
yeah,
X-Men?
yeah.
Mhm.
Except I couldn't stop reading it. It was really good. No, but that's what I
Really
would
good at
want.
They hook
Hmm?
they can hook you. That's true.
Well,
JLA did the
but
same
it
for me.
shows me something that I perhaps felt that I either missed or ignored or disagreed with, but I can't stop reading it. I mean, that is what I would want as a reader, an irresistible story, with visions of characters perhaps that I created or have written or am identified with, that shows me pieces of their reality that I hadn't considered.
Mhm.
And makes me want to come back for more.
There's a question in the chat that people keep bringing up.
Mhm.
So I'll just kind of summarize it. There's a retcon regarding Nightcrawler's parents. Was that actually an original Chris Claremont idea? And I believe they're talking about.
Which retcon are we talking about?
Well, now it's the retcon about Mystique being Nightcrawler's
Oh,
father.
God, yeah.
I remember
From the
but
beginning.
I've told this story before, but I just I wanted you to tell, like, people that idea was something that, my goodness, years ago, right?
Yeah, 40 plus, I don't know. Much like the fact that why it took people half a century to realize that Mystique and Destiny were an item.
And I've talked to several creators, that at that time, what they wanted to do with characters, what they wanted, whether characters to be in relationships and things. And at the time, it was a different time, and editors were like, no, you can't do that. I mean, the whole thing with North Star, right? But what you guys
Been by
did,
about 15 years.
right? Oh my God, which is just crazy. And
Well,
not like it was done in any kind of great way or anything. But
you need to bear in mind that comics were defined by the Comics Code.
oh yes, sir.
And we had enough trouble with heterosexual relationships, much less alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point, I think, with me and the X-Men, in some ways, as with Frank and Daredevil, you present the reality, you just don't brag about it.
Which you
And
guys,
let the readers draw their own conclusions. And the conclusions they might draw when they're 12 or 15 might be substantially different from what the ones they'll draw when they're 25 or 30. or 40.
I think a good writer back then, like you were really guilty of being that, could say things without having to say it, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Could make the reader understand that this is what's going on,
Mhm.
but we're not going to talk about it because of, like you said, the comics code and everything else that was, I mean, different times.
Well, but
Um,
there are ways you can present things that, I mean, doing a scene where um, either Madeline or Jean, I think it was Madeline, wakes up from a nightmare
mhm,
and Scott runs in the door wondering if she's okay. And the key elements of that moment are they're obviously wearing the same pair of pajamas. She's wearing the top, he's wearing the bottom. It's it's a it's a king size bed, and the she's on the well, from the reader's point of view, the left side. The right side, if you really look at the panel, clearly someone's been sleeping there.
right.
But you can draw your own conclusions.
And we did. We
Well, but
did.
that's the point.
And
For
and
me,
that was
it's
the storytelling that we had. And
well, it's reader participation.
I mean,
If
I don't know about anybody else. Like, I'm pretty sure we all agreed that Destiny and Mystique were together. Like, that was that was just understood to me as a kid, even as a kid. Um, and I think a lot of people got that. And now it's, it's a thing. It's like they are, right? But
yeah,
back then, because of the comics code and everything else going on, like you said, it just seemed like it couldn't be said. But there were a lot of moments like that in comics that I remember.
well, I'm
Really
English. I
quickly,
like to be
just from
tactful.
yes, tactful is the right word. Lenny Laserdisc, Mr. Claremont, you're a legend, and thank you for
Well,
all your
hopefully
work.
that doesn't mean I'm dead.
No, no, no. X-Men Legends is still coming out, and that's still an ongoing thing. Thank you so much for the kind words. Yeah, I had a Christopher Priest on the other day. Um, but a great guy speaking, of that era at Marvel, just how different it was than it is now. Because it is, right? Like writing now is a lot different, I'm sure. I'm sure maybe your editor, you may not even have to meet face to face. You can just Zoom call and
Now or
right?
then?
Email? No, now.
Yeah. Well, it's the fun thing was you come into the office, you go out to lunch, you talk, you kick ideas around.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Jim Shooter would walk in and yell at Ann Nesenti because we did something he didn't like, and she'd just look at him from behind her desk with these big eyes, and Jim would finish by saying, "I want this fixed." I think it was about all the Hellfire Club's troopers that Wolverine killed, and he
Mhm.
wanted to establish that Charlie had how a place for them to recover and nurse themselves back to health, and then be
Shooter
turned.
Shooter did?
I think so, yeah,
Okay.
as editor in chief. And Anne just like nodded politely and walked out the door, and that was that. We never mentioned it again, and we didn't fix anything.
I
It's
love it.
well, it's just it. We followed our own instincts. I mean, the advantage was that with editors like Louise Simonson and Ann Nesenti, they could persuade editors in chief without it being a confrontation, which it tended to be with male editors.
Mm.
That might be
And
just my perception, but there you go.
so really good questions in the chats. I'm just trying to pick some out here. Who was your favorite artist to work with?
The one I haven't worked with yet.
Same answer that you gave me for what's your favorite story you wrote. I
Well,
love that.
how do you choose? But I mean, if you look at the list of writers, I mean, of artists that I've worked with, how the hell do you choose from A to B to C?
Like choosing your favorite child, right?
No, actually.
No?
No, I mean, it's there. No, with favorite child, it's all of the above. But with artists, I would love to do a story with Frank. I'd love to do a story with Walter. I would have dearly loved to do a story with Jack Kirby or Neil Adams, but there you go.
Oh, man. And you came close. God Loves, Man Kills. That was supposed to be Neil. He actually drew a couple of pages and had to back out of the project.
I think we did all right.
Oh, yeah. But still,
I think with
my
Neil, we
favorite.
probably would have needed 150 pages. Would have sold like gangbusters, but sometimes, sometimes it goes one way, sometimes it goes the other. You just play the game. But I think my only regret for God Loves Man Kills is I don't have a copy of. I think I have maybe one copy of the second volume, which of course came out in the middle of COVID.
Oh, you mean the reprint with the added pages?
Yeah.
That one? Mm-hmm.
The second edition.
Yeah, they made it into a gallery edition, a hardcover. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I know. I'd like to get one somewhere, but nobody has any.
Oh, well, let me see what I can do next time I see you at a con.
No, it's the heartbreak about God Loves, Man Kills is that it's still painfully relevant. And
I think sadly,
I heard earlier in the year that Stryker is becoming more and more popular.
Popular how?
In that, as a character in the book, people agree with his perspective much more than with Magneto's.
Now, I've seen the Magneto was right shirts, and you made him such a complex character. I completely see that. Well, but Stryker, though, no, absolutely not.
Well, but fighting again, the challenge I see if one moves off of the Krakoa arc and into reality is where do you go from there? How do you, yes, coming back to the mansion? Okay, how do you do it? I mean, everybody on Krakoa has revoked, I understood, their citizenships. So they're illegal for the most part. How does that work? How do you, I mean, I did the last time I was on Uncanny with Chris Baccello, was doing an arc of stories where the government had basically taken control of the school to protect the X-Men. This is after M-Day.
Mm-hmm. The desolation.
And they were being observed, quote unquote, by Sentinels. They were basically under surveillance, under government restriction, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's the next step from there? I'm curious to see where or how or if the continuity goes from Krakoa to that next step. How do you?
Well, I mean, the easy way out would be to say, well, this is just another one of Moira's lives. And all of that took place in another dimension. That's the easy way. I don't think they'll do that, but I mean, that is the loophole that they built.
That's their decision. That's their construction. I hope it's brilliant. I would like to be in a situation where I want to see what happens next. Very much so. If for no other reason than I can be ridiculously jealous.
Do you still find yourself reading comics? Like, is there a particular writer that you follow that you're like, oh, I really like their work?
Not as much as I would like, simply because I'm too busy with doing my own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps not so much comics as I would wish, but there are other things. If nothing else, walking the dog. No, I mean, it's reading is as challenging as writing because you want to go in and find something that will ensnare you and seduce you, and find out, oh my gosh, what are you going to do now? Damn, why didn't I think of that?
And there has been moments like that for you where you're like, damn, why didn't I think of that? Like,
Oh yeah.
let's just bring it back to X-Men, right? Like, what was the moment, the last moment, let's say, thank you so much, MV Maps, that you went, damn, that was a good idea. Why
Well,
didn't I think
again,
of that?
new X-Men.
Okay, Grant Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
Any
Oh,
particular?
I will confess that part of me is thinking, if I ever was given carte blanche again, I would go back, and there's Kitty stuck in the bullet, just flying through space.
Oh, astonishing
Yeah,
X-Men.
Joss's thing.
Joss Whedon? Yeah, okay.
And open it with, she's trying to hold on to her sanity, and that's when Lockheed catches up with her and melts the bullet melts her out of the bullet, which is the good news. The bad news is apparently the bullet's gone extraterrestrial, and she has no idea where she is, and Lockheed, in a sense, has no idea where they are, and how the heck do you get home? So my attitude in that instance can be summed up by, anything Captain Marvel can do, Pride can do better.
Nice.
No,
You
again, that's me.
love Kitty Pryde. I love that you love her so much. Was that one of your favorite characters to write?
She had the advantage of being the first original character to write. The
Not
interesting
Dazzler. Well, Dazzler came after her, but she actually
Dazzler
the X-Men.
wasn't. I mean, I had an original concept for Dazzler, but that was when she was going to be black.
I remember.
And the idea of her being a Chicago rap singer going up against Aurora I thought would be totally cool. No, I mean, the original characters I had were Mystique and Destiny and Rogue and Sabretooth, all of whom were either Ms. Marvel or Iron Fist characters.
Yeah.
So in a way, if I had gotten a boot off of the X-Men in 141, everybody I created would have been created out for the Marvel universe. So who knows what Kevin Feige could have come up with all of that.
Were there any characters that were inspired by real people that you knew or grew up with?
All
of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've known some. Look, I have a dear friend who is on, fairly close relationship with at least 2 former presidents.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, come on. If I'm going to do my, how many removes am I from really cool people? It gets ridiculous. But look, that's their lives. This is my life. The same thing applies. I have known people who work at NPR who talk to, you don't want to know how many people that are so totally cool. But that's, a writer, if they're any good, will swipe from everybody. That's what they should do. That's the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
I think what my goal was in writing anything, but especially writing the X-Men, was to make these characters as real and relevant to the world of the readers as I can.
And you did.
The one most flattering and most wonderful reality was knowing that people were queuing up outside of comic book retailers every third Thursday because they had to see what happened next. I mean, I don't think there's a writer in the world that wouldn't go, wow, if they knew that about their work. And
do you remember the first time for you?
what,
The
did I
very
find
first
out about that?
the very first time that you realized, "Huh, I think people like my stuff." I know you all used to get letters, right?
Yeah,
But I don't know how
usually.
much of that was shared with you all, the actual writers and creators.
Are you
But
kidding? Who do you think did the letter columns?
well, every single letter you got to read?
No,
Because I mean,
not
there
got
must
to
have
read. I got them. I went
my
into the
goodness, there
office, I
were
picked them up, I
hundreds of
read
them.
them.
There were hundreds of them, Chris. There's
No,
really?
about 100,
Okay.
100 and a quarter.
That's a lot of reading. My goodness.
Yeah,
I really thought the editors would get to read them first and then hand you all like a
editors have more important things to do.
wow,
Bear in
that is
mind, editors are
crazy.
focusing on a half dozen books or
You're
more.
right. You're right.
All I
But
have
I
to
just
focus on
or
was
maybe an intern, right? I thought like somebody would get a first pass at the letters and then hand you all off like, the best 12 or something like that. I
no,
had no idea that you
been
read them.
there,
That's amazing.
done that.
That's amazing.
So we were gopher. I was a gopher in those days, not an intern.
Gopher. What was the moment that you realized, "Huh, I think people like my work?" Was there a moment for you that you remember?
Well, the cheap moment is when, I kept getting assignments. The only person you really count on in those days for who loves my work was the
Uh,
editor in chief. I mean, the thing, the classic story is Roy Thomas calling all of us in and saying, okay, and this is like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening.
mhm.
We haven't gone home yet. And he holds up this handful, like the 16 pages of original art for an issue for a story. I said, okay, I need this written by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Who wants it? And I got my hand up first. But the downside of that is the story had to be written and turned in 12 hours, 14 hours. Well, it's a test, but that's the whole point. If you do it, then you go to the head of the line to get the next one. If you don't do it, you go to the back of the line. There's no,
Mhm.
when you're on final deadline, there's no screwing around. I got it
So
in and it was halfway decent. So I got, I moved up the ladder.
so by editors giving you the next job, the next
Well,
work, or first dibs on, like
there were no editors. There was Roy.
so it was Roy pretty much just telling,
No, Roy
like,
ran
people,
the shop, and the rest of us were like
"Wow."
occasional assistant editors who
Mhm.
did the scut work, the edit, well, the proofreading. And when Land was editor in chief, I was his associate editor, which meant,
Mhm.
I handled a lot of the proofreading of the finished book. And then there was maybe, I think, one other assistant editor who did the scut work below me. And there was no screwing around. You had to get these books out. There was, you had to get them in on time. The weird thing was the ideal moment was you had to have books ahead of schedule. And ideally, the more ahead of it you were, the better off.
Well, I
Because
think in all the years of you writing X-Men, I can't think of a fill-in issue. 'Cause, every time I would go back and read, especially with these collected editions, you go back and read these issues. Sometimes they'll
Mhm,
reprint just the cover and saying, "This is just a reprint of Fantastic Four number 5," something
mhm.
like that. I can't think of a single issue of X-Men, and I am getting older though, but like that you did not write, like when you were there,
Oh,
when
no,
you were
right,
actually
yes, plot, no. We had one, I think, around 106, the, um,
the early years.
well, that was a fill-in that I had to write because the fill-in was so old that the realities of the characters had totally changed from, I mean, no one knew back then who they, I mean, we knew what they looked like, but as to who and what they were,
Mhm.
that was less reality. And then there was another one in the 200s that Rick Leonardi drew, that I wrote over.
Might have been the aftermath of the Fall of the Mutants, like
Might have been. It was
229.
Tom Brevoort. No, editor-in-chief back then. Well,
DeFalco?
He plotted it. I scripted it.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, that could have been it. I know you've got deadlines. Speaking of deadlines, and Beth was sweet enough to give me 45 minutes with you, but I do want to. This is really sweet. I need you to see this. Your work made such a difference to my childhood that I named my daughter Jean Grey.
Oh, I hope she forgives you. Or conquers the universe, whichever comes first.
It was 228.
Without eating a inconveniently located planet. I have to say, that is the most extraordinary moment of writing these books, is going to conventions and having people come up and tell me quite honestly how important the book was to them, the characters were to them, that the reality was to them. And I'm not just even talking about in the States, which makes a certain amount of sense. I was back when it was not inappropriate. I did an appearance in Moscow, not Idaho, the other one. And I had people come up to me. I mean, the signing ran 3 hours late, 3 hours over deadline, because they were coming up and talking about how much the characters and the books and the stories meant to them. I mean, this isn't Russia, for crying out loud.
See, you're international. Goes to show you how much.
If only they had paid attention to this before, if only someone had given it to Vladimir before he decided I was going to invade the country next door. But
so his daughter's name is Phoenix. Her nickname is Phoenix. That's adorable. She loves
it. What can I say? It's just, I still find it extraordinary. I still find it awesome. I still can't quite get over why people react this way. But the flip side of that is, okay, if that's the way things were, I got to go out and do it better now to justify that level of faith and see what I can do that I haven't done before. About the Genesis creation ideas of Forge?
Yeah, he was wondering about your ideas that you had for Forge. But, not only was he a mutant with the ability to create things, right? But he had Native American powers.
Yeah.
And you had ideas for, well, I know you had big ideas for
indigenous people powers.
Indigenous
American is an European term.
Well, thank you for that correction, sir. You've been correcting me since I was a kid, so I appreciate it. But did you have ideas for him going? Because I know he became part of the team, and then him and Storm were an item.
Well, he wasn't part of the team at that point. It was just he was sort of crazy at that point, and I figured Ro needed someone. She needed someone, and she needed someone who was her equal in certain respects, and of course, being Ro, it needed to be a doomed romance, except it was fulfilled, except it was doomed. And, I think it was trying to, the biggest challenge was, I remember, okay, you guys can have North America. I'll take the rest of the world. I have no problem with that. I wanted to do stories about countries that we didn't see very often, people we didn't see very often.
Mm-hmm.
Superheroes in India and Pakistan, and maybe going north of the border and see what heroes in Western China were like.
I have you to thank for a lot of historical lessons that I learned. Without you even knowing, because I actually shared this with when I had Garth Ennis on the show, and because he learned a lot of things about war through comics, And I was the same. I was learning about, like, I remember when Sean showed up in New Mutants and she was speaking in French. And I was like, why is this Vietnamese girl speaking in French? So thanks to you, I learned about all of this stuff. Like, so I always wondered, like, how much research did it take? Because it's not easy, right? You weren't a firm believer in writing what you know. You were like, I'm going to write what I don't know. So it had to have been like a lot of research going into a lot of these characters because they're coming from different parts of the world.
Yeah, but those are back in the days when all you had was National Geographic. It wasn't like you could go
on Google.
Yeah. There was no Google. And flying in everywhere was sort of awkward. And Vietnam was not. I mean, the weird thing is it's been 50 years, and the reality that's Sean's past now has nothing to do with the reality then.
No.
Right. I mean, the fact that if you did a story about Kurt being chased through the Prussian hillsides by a mob that looked like they just stepped out of Frankenstein, the 1930s Frankenstein, I don't think would go over very well just in plausibility. But then one has to sit back and think about how do you redefine it.
Different times.
Yeah, but
different times for sure.
That was why in Extreme we started out by, oh look, we're in Spain now. Oh wait, Tom Cruise and what's her face are still married.
Nicole Kidman, right? Nicole Kidman. Yeah, at that time.
But then moving again, dumping the X-Men in the middle of Australia.
My favorite era. My favorite. I love that era. I know. Everybody has
the trouble is we had to get them. It didn't.
The Reavers. Oh my gosh, the Siege Perilous. Oh my gosh, there were those stories. Those were stories of my youth, man. I love every single one of them.
I mean, the neat thing, the frustrating thing was when Salvador got swiped by the publisher to do a different series, and we ended up with Igor. I mean, Igor Corday for me was just wonderful, totally unlike any other artist Marvel was publishing at the time,
and so fast. Fast.
Don't even. He's up. No, he was up there with Jack. He was up there with Byrne. He was up there with, But the thing with Salva and me is we were both stuck on this one book. Both of us were promised a second book. It hadn't showed up yet, so we just kept doing new X-Men. I mean, sorry, Uncanny X-Men, and doing 2 issues a month. So that was very unlike Marvel capability in those days, at the turn of the century. Artists were much less efficient, and I came out of an age when John Romita Sr. was just banging stuff out. Junior was just starting to bang things out. Jack banged things out as a matter of course.
Yeah, that was crazy how much those guys are legends, man. Like how much they did.
I've told this story many times, but it's like there was a day, like in the morning, 4 pages come in from John Buscema. Oh, cool. Like then 5 pages come in from Sal. Then like a half hour later, 5 come in from John. Then 4 come in from Sal. Then 4 come in from John. 7 come in from Sal. It was like they were just calling each other and saying, ha, I did 7. Oh yeah, screw you.
I bet there was some nice competition in there.
But the thing is, this isn't finished art. This is layouts. But the thing with Buscema layouts is that all you needed was a good finisher, and you were off to the races. By the end of the day, I think it was something around 30 pages from each. 2 complete, one complete issue plus a chunk of the next issue, and that was how you did business. Everybody up at Marvel could do a book a month. Otherwise, what was the point? Those were the rules. And that's why you had top-notch inkers covering the back. John Byrne could do 2 books a month. I mean, that
John Byrne was another, well, oh my gosh, he was a machine. He was writing and drawing and inking, and sometimes he would even try to letter. That's just crazy. Now, that's one of those stories when I have you back the next time of what could have been had John stayed on X-Men with you. And
it would have been pretty brutal.
We don't have to talk about it this time because you're always invited back anytime. But
I mean, the thing with John and I is we had 2 fundamentally different visions of the X canon, and John knew he was right, and I knew I was right. And John gave Jim Shooter an ultimatum: either Chris goes or I go, assuming that Shooter would pick him. And Jim's response was, "Well, Chris has been doing this since it started, and it really wouldn't be fair to bounce him. So how about you? I'll give you the FF." And that's the way it is. It's, we were, sometimes things work, sometimes things don't. There was a seminal point in relationships where Stan and Jack just couldn't do it anymore. And the reason why everyone discovered when he went over and did the Forever People et al. Over at DC.
Oh yeah, the Fourth World stuff that he was doing.
Fourth World, and it was brilliant. You pick up the first issue and it's like, wow, this is wonderful. And you read through it and there were like 10 brilliant concepts there. Holy cow. And that hadn't even included the 4 other issues. And so you wait, and a month later, the second issue comes out. Holy cow, there are 10 brilliant concepts. Oh, but there are already 10. And then with the third issue, there were 10 more. And the thing with Jack was he created with such extraordinary vision and skill, and he couldn't stop.
That could have been Thor.
But you got overwhelmed by it, which is why DC kind of pushed the plug in, and they've been living off of it ever since. What Stan did, what made him so fundamental with Jack and with everyone else, is he saw the story. This is the story. So he focused on the story. He wrote the story. You pick up the story and it's like, wow, this is great. But Jack got more and more furious that all of his stuff, so much of his stuff was pushed aside because Stan figured we'll use it later. But Jack wanted to use it now.
Yeah. I mean, I just like you, I'm sure, like all of that stuff he wanted to do on Thor and make his own little fourth world at Marvel, and had the vision for graphic novels, visionary for sure. Jack was a visionary and definitely deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore of creators along with you.
But you need to strike a balance. You need to have something that the reader can focus in on and fall in love in sequence, not just the story after the commercial break is maybe the same characters, but totally different from the story before the commercial break. And
right.
I mean, the thing that was the essence of God Loves, Man Kills.
Mm-hmm.
The driving force was, if you only have one X-Men to read, what would it be that encompassed everything? The characters, the conflicts, the reality.
That's always my choice.
Well, but that's what it's supposed to be. If you're on a desert island, this is the one you get.
Well, you accomplished it.
I think, I'll finish off. The one fundamental difference between the opening we had and Neil's opening is that Neil has Magneto fleeing through this huge construction site or industrial site, being chased by the Reverend's goons, and they catch him and dump stuff on him. And my problem looking at it was, it's a standard superhero fight. Who cares? That's not where the story needs to go, or needs to start to set the right tone. What we need is two kids, little kids, running for their lives and being executed. It needs to go on a fundamental, real world moment of horror. And I don't mean demon horror, something that it's a moment of heartbreak. And then you have, if you're reading the moment, you have to sit back and think, holy cow, what about their parents? You know, what happened to them? And that's what starts you down the path. And it shows you why Magneto is the way he is. But then when you move into the X reality, and Kitty's moment of confrontation with her dance student, and yes, the use of the N-word, that wasn't a casual choice, and it wasn't me saying, ooh, this is going to get everybody cool because I'm using a forbidden word. It was there. It was the same way as someone using the K word for Kitty. You know what I mean by the K word?
I believe I do, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Putting all this in fundamental real world terms, so that the superhero stuff, while it is cool, it's not the most important part. And indeed, the superhero stuff is what ends up getting slapped in the face more often than not. And that Stryker presents himself as, he sees himself as an agent of good, but it all depends on which side of the road you're standing on.
And that's what makes an intriguing villain, right? Somebody that thinks they're doing the right thing.
But that you could use the same rationale with Magneto.
Oh, absolutely. But Magneto has a lot of redeeming qualities and would never murder children. Well, that's another story for another.
In his own mind, Stryker also, I mean, this is why I was really not thrilled with the second X-Men movie.
Because they changed the idea of God Loves Man Kills to a military type of story.
It made Stryker, it defined him as a different character than what he was defined at in the novel. And my feeling was, if you're going to do that, if you're going to do Stryker, do the novel. If you don't have the balls to do the novel, then don't use Stryker.
Just create your own character. But I guess that you had to associate it with X-Men by name.
Just create a new character that's associated with the movie X-Men and make that character so irresistible in his own way that, you know, the audience doesn't notice that it's different, which in a way is what they ended up doing with Days of Future Past.
Yeah, Days of Future Past, and that was one of my favorites. Of course, that's one of my favorite Claremont stories. Anyway,
but in its fundamental structure, overall structure, it followed the comic.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that's all you need. Trust your source material.
I wish more.
My apologies. I've talked too much.
No, you can never talk enough. I know that you've got deadlines and you got to go back to writing. Hopefully X-Men. But what besides...
Well, there is. I can't talk about it, but yeah.
Well, I will have to have you back so we can talk about that then, when you can talk about it.
Well, here, this is a teaser.
All right, show me the teaser. Nice. Okay. So this is the story that comes out in February, right? And it's a limited series.
I won't show you the art because that would probably get... Well, actually, the art has been on. We sent some.
I've seen covers. Yeah, covers are available. As a matter of fact, I have a cover here to the first issue of Madripoor Nights. This one here.
Yep.
There we go. So it's a classic, it's like classic stance that I believe that was Philip Tan that drew that.
There you go.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's like going back home. I love that issue. That is a very iconic issue. So I'm glad they decided to go back.
It is a slight joke in that oh, for goodness sake. Salva and I did a 10-pager where Wolverine and Kitty are fighting these, actually the 3 superpowered characters who showed up in Extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in Madripoor. And the setting of the story is this 2-kilometer tall skyscraper, mile-high skyscraper, which in Madripoor Night, since that is set before the Salva story, the skyscraper is under construction. So even though there may not be Marvel continuity, there's Claremont Marvel continuity.
And that's some of the best continuity out there.
Well, so it's fun. And, I like writing Captain America. I like writing the Widow. There is a moment where, since Cap's on ice for 20 years, if not longer, so Wolverine and the Widow have a chance to build their relationship when she's working for the KGB.
Well, sir, on that note, I just want to thank you for being here. No, it's not that. Is that Beth warned me. I better get you off.
She warned me too, and I'm, as usual, ignoring it.
But anyway, so you come back anytime you want to, especially when this other project that you're going to be working on after Wolverine Madripoor Nights is announced.
Theoretically, it's supposed to launch a month after Madripoor Nights finishes, so midsummer.
Okay. Well, then I will have you back when it's announced, because I would love to keep talking to you when you have a little more time. But I know deadlines.
In summer,
like you said. You're going to be flying around everywhere.
I just want to say to all the people who texted, thank you very, very much. It always is. It's always appreciated. Uh-oh, there you go. Logan Wayne. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, where do you think that name came from? Amalgam, if you remember that era.
Road, I just want to say thank you. And this is always fun. And got to spend the next 20 minutes reading all the notes.
Well, the beauty of this is that you can go back and rewatch your interview and look at all the different comments as they're flying by, and then all these nice things about you and your work and what it means to everybody over the years.
Oh,
that's the beauty of this.
Well, thank you. If only I could draw.
But everybody go and check out Madripoor Nights, and of course his amazing library that's available in Omnibus and Epic Collection and trade paperbacks, Marvel Masterworks. It's a lot of Claremont out there.
I've even done Batman. Well, actually, it wasn't Batman. It was Bruce Wayne.
But you did Bruce Wayne, yeah.
Well,
so thank you everybody for joining us.
Anyway, thank you for being here. Hopefully